Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa, and I will be the host for today's interview in our series called Making STEM Human. This series is part of RePicture, a mission-driven public benefit organization, and our vision is a world where everybody can thrive in STEM so that fields that address critical challenges like climate change look more like the people affected by it. We're trying to build new ways for people to explore careers in the world of STEM, and one of those ways is through our interview series. This series is dedicated to understanding the journeys behind the real people shaping our world and our future. And with that, I'm super excited to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Livia Wilz Brier. Livia is a talented biochemist and cell biologist with a decade of experience managing and conducting research in academic settings. She has a PhD in molecular and cell biology from UC Berkeley, where she specialized in membrane trafficking. Now she's the director of development at Valitor, an early stage biotech company located in Berkeley. She was one of the first employees at Valitor and has been instrumental in developing a multivalent biopolymer therapeutic to treat vision disorders such as Wet AMD. Livia is an enthusiastic scientist who is eager to collaborate with other scientists to tackle human diseases. All right, with that, let's begin our Q&A. So welcome, Livia.
Yes, excited to talk today.
So to start off, I was wondering, can you tell us a bit of your story of how you got to where you are today, such as, your early education to even your first job? What has really influenced your direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from rural Indiana, so not a traditional route for those necessarily coming to Berkeley. I grew up on a farm with, a lot of cows and horses and dogs and chickens and everything growing up. And I was always kind of interested and curious, but I wasn't necessarily the kid that played with a chemistry set. I just liked things around me, especially a lot of nature. And, but for whatever reason, I knew I didn't necessarily want to be a doctor or a vet. It just didn't quite interest me. But I love my horses. I loved everything. And once I was in high school, I started taking chemistry. And for whatever reason, that really piqued my interest. I loved the order of how everything went together. And I think I did have at least a couple of really great teachers who sparked my interest. But again, I liked the science, I liked the math, but for whatever reason, I did not want to do, I think, the more traditional visual parts. Like I didn't want to do pharmacy, I didn't want to be a vet or a doctor. And I actually even remember when I was 16 in, I think, one of my science classes putting together a project of what I wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to develop drugs. And sure enough, that's what I ended up doing. And so a couple of different things had to happen in order to make that work. And one of them was I needed to go to, a school that had a great science program. And one of my family friends, she was an alumni from Indiana University. She took me on a tour of IU when I was a junior. It was about 2 hours away from me. So I didn't want to move fully across the country. That seemed too far away from my family as an 18-year-old, but IU is a great school and it's really close. I didn't know it was as great as it was at the time, but my family friend, she did a great job of actually getting me a tour of the chemistry department by one of I think he was the head of the department at the time, and it really sparked my interest. I applied to IU for an early admit. That was the only school I applied to, the only school I got in, and that was it. And so at IU, I, started taking all your standard chemistry courses. As someone coming from a rural area where I had a small high school, it wasn't a magnet school, I actually had a lot of imposter syndrome in the first couple of years, especially because all of these students around me had, AP chemistry, and at least they were spouting all these. I had AP chemistry, but I wasn't great in it. But they were spouting all these things, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to catch up. But it turned out I was holding my own, and I did really well on my coursework. And I also really ended up loving organic chemistry. which not everyone does. I was terrified of taking it. And again, it's fascinating. So I spoke to one of my professors because I knew if I wanted to do drug development, I had to work in a lab. And I knew I wanted to try it as soon as possible because, I didn't want to have this idea about my career, but not know if it was actually something I enjoyed. So I wanted to try it pretty soon. So after my freshman year in organic chemistry, I spoke to the professor. He gave me a position in his lab for the sophomore year. And I tried out organic chemistry. And it turned out I hated doing organic chemistry in the lab. And this is kind of one of my best things that I've learned is even if you like the idea of the science, doing it, you have to also like what you have to do it. So I loved what I was doing. It was actually working on things kind of related to BPA and the chemical that's in plastic that leaches out and how it's affected by your body. I love the idea of the project, but what I was doing was super boring to me. And at the time I was taking biochemistry and loved that course. Spoke to that professor. She gave me a position in her lab and doing some more of the biology and, kind of more of the transitional work. And it felt a bit more translational. And I think it was just easier for me to pick up in my brain. I started working on that. And it was a project that was kind of loosely related to antibiotic resistance. And that really intrigued me. So I spent three or four of the summers in undergrad working in the lab, also working in the lab during my academic career, and I absolutely loved it. I think I had some great mentors, and then so that made me decide I wanted to go to grad school. And from there, I interviewed at a wide range of schools, and Berkeley was by far the best fit. I was ready to pick up and move a plane flight away from my family at that point. And Berkeley is really one of the best places in the world for biotech and for biology and in chemistry and a lot of different sciences. So that's what made me come out here. And the weather. The weather's pretty great.
I would like to agree.
Yeah. So then at Cal, I again really thought I was more interested in kind of immune host reactions and antibiotic resistance like I was in undergrad, but I started doing some more of the immunology work and rotations. And again, I realized I didn't like that science on a day-to-day basis. And it's just what it is. You have personal preferences for the type of experiments you do. And that didn't really seem to be a fit for me. But in grad school, you rotate in a range of different labs. And one of the labs I rotated in was from a professor who was studying this membrane trafficking process called autophagy. And it's kind of the cells recycling system is the best way to do it. So I joined that lab. I thought it was super fascinating. And through a range of things, I ended up switching labs, still studying autophagy, but in the lab of Randy Sheckman, who he won the Nobel laureate for medicine in 2013 while I was in his lab. So being trained by a world-class scientist who is in a lab full of world-class scientists and membrane trafficking was really, really fascinating and really fun. My PhD took a little bit longer because I did switch labs, but I graduated in 2015, and I think I learned a range of different things from grad school. And one of those was I did not want to be a professor. I started grad school thinking I wanted to be a professor, but it's hard work. And I think plain and simple, I joined grad school in 2009, which is kind of the beginning of the financial crisis. A lot of universities were on hiring freezes. And I was seeing people coming in for their faculty positions after the hiring position, after doing about 6 years in grad school, maybe 6 years in a postdoc, and they're 35, 34, finally interviewing for a career position and had been moving across the country. And that just didn't really appeal to me. And in addition, I don't think I like basic science, but I think I wanted something that was a bit more translational. And for a range of other reasons, but I said, there's so many other companies, there's so many interesting things in the Bay Area. So I didn't have a strict thing about what I wanted to do. I applied to big companies, I applied to small companies, and I landed at a job at Valitor. And at the time, we were 3 employees. So very, very small. And I guess one of my funny stories is the reason I found Valitor is I was applying for a range of different jobs. And one day I decided I'm just going to apply to 10 companies. Going to send out a generic resume and I'm just going to apply to 10 companies. And one of those 10 companies was Valitor. And I just found it in the sidebar of LinkedIn. So, and it turned out to be a really great fit. It was scary to join a startup, but also really exciting to start something from the ground up. And yeah, so I've been at Valitor for almost 8 years now. And so my career has, and at the time when I joined, we had 2 years of funding. So I didn't think I was going to be here as long as I am, but I love it and it's fantastic. So that's roughly where I landed.
That's so amazing. I love your journey and how you were sort of testing things like throughout the entirety of your life. You know, you found out that you like science, but not like intense research part of it. But then you also found out that you also didn't like teaching, which is super fascinating. I was gonna ask, you know, do you like teaching? Because since you have a
Mhm.
PhD.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's certain types of teaching. I think there's the big courses, and I think some people really have the knack for engaging a large audience. And I do love teaching. And I did see one of the other questions is about mentorship. And I do think I'm much better one-on-one. Um, actually, one of the reasons why I was a little bit late to this is because I was talking to my employee and, was like, okay, I'm going to be late to this meeting, but I'm going to tell you, describe this experiment, was drawing it on the whiteboard for her to better understand rather than just do the experiment. So I think there's a lot of different ways of doing science. There's also a lot of different ways of teaching. And I think no matter what you're interested in, even if you don't find that perfect fit for what feels right to you, there's always something that's somewhat similar. I think also in science, I'm not doing as much actual bench work right now. But for me, I still wanted to be doing experiments after grad school. But I have a lot of friends who didn't want to touch a pipette ever again in their lives, but they still love science. And so I think the thing is there's a lot of science you can do that isn't necessarily doing experiments, which is kind of the standard way of thinking about it. There's so many other things that are related to or supporting science that are all, I mean, it's a big industry. So there's a lot of different things that are still touching science, still allowing you to utilize that background that you have and that interest you have, even if you don't have the skills or the, really like doing just the bench work. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. Um, so I wanted to move on to our next question. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do now? Like dive a little deeper. You know, there's going to be a bunch of follow-up questions, but like, you know, how does your work help people? You know, what does your day-to-day look like? And what do you enjoy most about what you do? And I'm assuming it's not the hard bench work anymore.
Well, I do love the bench work, but I think there's a range of reasons why I moved off it. But I think in general, right now, my day-to-day as director of development. First up, as a startup, I think one of the best things is your day-to-day is never really, it can change a lot. But I do a lot more computer science than physical science right now. But I do have 2 direct reports who are doing work in the labs. So part of my day is managing them, helping them figure out what experiments they're running, maybe help troubleshoot them, or if it's something new they haven't done, of course, I'll go in and help them. One of the perks of being at this company for so long, and especially for in some of the early stages, still almost every experiment that we do in the lab, I have done. Much people do it way better than I have, but I do have the manual, memory of doing a lot of these things. And especially if it's something that we haven't done in a while, I still might have to go back in and say, okay, this is how we do it, or if you're troubleshooting. But and of course, that's one of the parts I enjoy is interacting with folks and collaborating with them. The other part that I work on as director of development, which is also kind of leads into my previous title at Valitor, which was the non-clinical director, is that we are in the early stages of developing our drug to treat ocular diseases. And of course, a lot of that involves testing it in a range of different ways. And because we're a small company, we don't have all those facilities in-house. So I do a lot of coordinating with CROs or contract research organizations to run those different sets of experiments for us. So there's a lot of, getting the proper quotes. So talking to a range of different companies and saying, hey, and evaluating, is it the right cost? Are they the right people? Is it going to work for us, to find that working relationship? And it's all over Zoom typically. And then going back and forth, designing the experiment on paper, having that experiment done or those sets of experiments done, and then evaluating what they do to make sure that they did it correctly, that, what experiments to do next. And so there's a lot of that science through communication and the, computer science in whatever way it is, but just managing either the folks in-house or the people that we're contracting to do some of that work for us. So that's the majority of my role. And then there's a lot of other, when we get some, for example, I'm not so patiently waiting for a data set that should be coming in any day now. And when that happens, we're going to be having a lot of discussions with the whole team and hearing everyone's, analyzing it, but then also hearing everyone's opinions and thoughts about what we should do moving forward, coming hopefully to a consensus about what to do with that. And really learning from everyone's different experiences, because now we're 15 people. So we have people from a wider range of experiences and backgrounds. And so there's a lot of just collaboration either across the company or also with the other organizations that we're working with.
You mentioned a lot of your tasks already, your day-to-day, and as the quote goes, with great power comes with great responsibility. And I was wondering, how are you balancing your typical day-to-day managerial tasks with your own passion for research and scientific exploration? Do you see them as one of them the same, or do you sort of like lean towards one more than the other?
Yeah, well, I do think I think in some ways when you manage people, that means you just kind of get to do more science, right? So rather than it's just me doing the one experiment, I am getting to kind of help multiple people do multiple experiments and helping plan them all. So, but it takes less time for me because I'm not actually doing the manual work. So I do think in some ways as a manager, I'm able to do even more science because I'm, helping coordinate a wider range of experiments. And I do think for me, I do love research and the R&D in the early stages of it. But as I'm growing with Valitor, as we're growing together, I'm also really liking the development and kind of the nuts and bolts behind how a drug gets made, because I do think as I was harping, or one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily want to go into academia is I realized there's some people who love a problem or have a question and need to find every single answer about that question and to dive really deep into it and need to figure out all of the whys. And those are the people who are really well suited for basic research in academia. And that's not really me. I'm much more of a, does it work? Okay, sounds good. Maybe we need to ask a why here or there, but I have a bit more of the engineering. I'm not an engineer, but I think more of the, let's make it work better, and let's find the ways to do it. But if there is something that's odd or, that may be atypical, that could be interesting, that may not necessarily be what we need to focus on. And and that's because we're making a drug. We don't need to answer all of the whys about it. We just need to make sure that most of it's answered. So I do think I have found the right balance in that way for my interest. And I think it's working quite well for me. But there's of course plenty of other things that are needed to be balanced. We have to just make sure we have all the proper, consumables and everything. And I'm also, I'm a working mother, so there's a lot of balance in the rest of my life too. Just making sure we keep it all aligned and moving and everyone happy.
Yeah, I love that perspective and how you sort of, I guess, really like dissected what types of roles are fit for what types of people, and how you discovered that you're definitely more into like the development end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so moving on to our next question. Throughout your career, I've noticed that you've engaged in a lot of teaching, mentoring roles, and you've already mentioned that you like doing it one-on-one.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, what really inspires you to do these sort of teaching, mentoring roles, and how has that experience influenced your approach to your leadership or your collaboration in your current position?
Yeah. Wait, what was the first part of the question? I had a good answer to it, but I
I was wondering, so what inspires you
oh,
to be interested in sort of these teaching and mentoring
yeah,
positions?
absolutely. Well, I think no one would be here if they didn't have a teacher or a mentor. Plain and simple. There are key teachers. I can name several of them, including, my fourth grade teacher, my high school chemistry teacher, my biochemistry teacher. There, there are teachers who have made me who I am. And granted, I don't want to be a teacher as my full role, but I think if I'm just growing and not giving back to the younger generations, then there's not going to be anyone coming after me. And I think it just makes sense to try to talk to as many of these young folk and get them interested. And, as someone who, for, this may be for more folks in Berkeley, they're not necessarily coming from a rural area, but I didn't have that vision of who a scientist was. And I really love the idea, but there's a lot of things that can be scary about it. And to just make that open and accessible to more people. And I think, especially as I think about my mentorship with some of the entry level employees here at Valitor and some of my direct reports, so much of it is also just finding who you are and making sure that you are, growing and are happy and able to flourish in the best way you can. And that may not necessarily be, it could be very easy for me to just give someone all the tasks and whether or not they do it, but that's going to get you burnt out. I want someone to grow to, be more of me, to have my whole field of all of the people I've mentored who are growing and doing things that I find just as fascinating, and to make more of the, great products, or to become doctors or whatever else they're doing. I think to me, it just doesn't make sense to be in a field without teaching others, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think um, I work at a nonprofit, and part of my role is to like teach high schoolers, younger people, anybody really about, plants and like planting. And I love it and I hate it at the same time because, sometimes it's a struggle to like just teach, like get people to listen and really pay attention.
Yep.
But at the same time, the people that love it really love it. And I find that very enjoyable.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe you answered this question already, but how has that sort of influenced your leadership and collaboration? So do you find that you're more open to it nowadays, or like do you just yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think um, part of the way I think I lead and the way that I mentor is um, everyone's a person. They're not just a cog in your machine or here to do experiment for you at perfect level. Everyone has stuff going on in their life. And as I have many times as well. And I think making sure to understand the person behind who you're working with. And I think that's kind of the leadership overall. I feel like I try to, with almost anyone I'm interacting, maybe not necessarily with the contract organizations, because that's a bit different, but the folks we're working with here, to know what's going on in their life, to know when there's times when you may be having a bad day because something's going on, or and also to celebrate those times that are really important. But I think just making sure you understand how everyone is fitting into, because your work is only a certain part of your day. And again, kind of harping back to me as a working mother, I think in a lot of the mentorship that I've had as well, a lot of it is focused on, how are you? How's the kid? is this balance right for you? And, even for folks who aren't parents, everyone has stuff going on. And as I was just reflecting, yesterday was the 4-year anniversary of lockdown and how much everything has grown since the pandemic lockdown. And I had a 2-year-old during the pandemic. It was crazy. But with people allowing me to do what I needed to do, but to also work has been very instrumental for me and has allowed me to grow. And I want to make sure that I lead with that example. And then collaborations, I mean, I think again, you're still always working with humans. I have these people who, if they maybe lax on a deadline or taking some time to respond to me, I always, rather than being frustrated right away, I think I'll give them a moment. They may have things going on, and, lead as a human, I think.
I love that. Always, I feel like we always need to keep that in mind, no matter what we're doing, whether we're leading or not leading, just knowing that other people have lives for themselves, and being empathetic is, or should be, how we should
Should
lead
be.
our lives. Yeah, should
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. But if I can,
Um,
continue to grow as an empathetic leader, I will continue to grow. And then I will grow an army of empathetic leaders who will come up after me. So perfect.
awesome. Awesome. I love that. Um, and I've also noted that you've authored several publications. How do you envision leveraging your research background to drive innovation and advancement in your current role? Like, you have a
Uh,
strong history of
yeah.
that.
Um, I guess maybe my imposter syndrome is coming in. I feel like I don't have as strong of a background in publications as others, but it took quite some time and a lot of work to get that my first author publication out. But I think publications are key, and I think they're helpful. But there's a lot of other science that goes on without having, that doesn't get that you don't write up. I do think no matter what, it's always key to be curious and to ask those questions, especially when you're in the academic setting where you have things that you can share. And, for us, I do have one publication through Valitor that we're able to share, but of course, there's a lot of other things that are a bit more proprietary, but we do have several patents. So those are kind of some of the ways we publish and in the industry. But I do like to, try to share and discuss innovations as much as you can, because, we're all a collective community of scientists and trying to learn. But yeah, I mean, I think innovation, especially at a startup, it just kind of comes with the course, right? We have a completely novel therapeutic that is bridging a lot of things together. Every once in a while, we look at ourselves and think, why did we make this drug so hard to make? But I think if we're able to pull it off, it's going to be revolutionary. And sometimes you gotta just take the risk and, and figure it out as you go and find the people who want to be a part of this ride. And, again, things are tricky. The new things aren't easy, and you just gotta kind of figure it out and work together and make it move forward. And I think most importantly, you got to be creative. I think not everyone realizes that science it's not just math and numbers and putting things together. It's mostly creativity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree and see that. I mentioned that I work at a nonprofit, and I feel like a lot of what we do is figuring it out as we go. Because, like when you're, especially like a startup, you're like the first or one of the first to try to champion whatever it is that you're trying to do, and not that your questions aren't answered. So you kind of just figure it out and hope that
Yep.
it works. And
Yeah,
I
and
absolutely see that.
you also don't have the money to do it all too.
Exactly.
So I guess one of my fortunately now we have much more of the instruments on site, but one of the jokes we used to have is we used to call my car Valitor Mobile. And earlier on, I lived in San Francisco, so I would basically have a mobile lab in the back of my car. I had a bag of pipettes and gloves and tips, and if I would be doing some preclinical studies, I'd have all of the things needed for dosing. I used to have a travel cooler where I would take the drugs with me. I'd take them home with me and keep them cold and dose them the next day. We had to be innovative. It was up until, I want to say, probably late 2021. I was at least, and I joined the company in 2016. I was probably driving at least once a week, if not more regularly, to some other site to have to figure out how to make it happen and to find someone who had the instrument who would let us use it. And you got to just roll up your sleeves and do it. Yep.
Yeah,
My husband is very
absolutely.
happy there's no more lab equipment in the trunk.
Clears up some room for him,
Yep.
Um, as someone with a PhD,
Mhm.
um, I was wondering what really motivates you to dive deeper into these complicated scientific questions, where you're sort of pushing boundaries of our understanding. Like, what's your motivation in all of that?
It's a cool puzzle, plain and simple. I mean, it's a cool puzzle that uses a lot of the skills that I've gained through, a wide range of things, but it's not even, as I mean, it may not be obvious, but my PhD is in membrane trafficking, cell trafficking within the cell. Our drug is, at least in its current iteration, completely outside of the cell. So it's not like I'm applying the specific ethos of my PhD, what I learned and what I became an expert in to this drug. It's just more of how to think creatively and how to solve problems and how to design experiments in a way that answer the questions in an appropriate way, and to minimize any doubt. And oh, I forget, what was the question again? I went through it, but I feel like I'm trailing off on a different realm.
What's your motivation for
Yeah.
diving into these deeper questions?
Yeah, and I think so much of it is just the puzzle. And I mean, the figuring out what's interesting and what's cool about things. And I think this kind of gets back to what I was saying is you got to like what you're doing. And our drug is to treat those with vision problems. That's our lead is for wet AMD, and it's a very important disease, and I think it threatens a lot of different people across the world. However, it's not something that I necessarily have a personal drive for, and that's okay. Because I think I like the puzzle. And I think one thing I've also learned is, even using the better example of like, if you are driven by, for a personal drive, for example, like if I had a family member who had this disease or something, and you want to keep working to cure that disease or to find a therapy for that disease, that's great. But if you're just don't like the work, but you care about the end goal, that may not be sustainable. And I think you can like both. And I think I'm, as time has gone on, I'm not an eye expert in any ways. I've become one because I'm learning so much. And I do realize how important a long-acting therapy for this disease would be. But most importantly, I like what I'm doing day to day. And I like the project, I like the puzzle, I like the novel drug, and trying to figure out all these different ways to analyze it and understand it better. And having the end goal of being a therapeutic that can benefit a lot of people is great, but that can't be the only goal because that's years and years away. And so that's what motivates me is the figuring out and the noodling through things every day and rolling up our sleeves and finding the puzzles and having the added benefit of, yes, this will hopefully be a very valuable therapy for humanity. It's great. But you can't use that to get you out of bed every morning, at least for me.
Right, right. I think a lot of college is sort of laying that, educational foundation, but like when you're working, it's not so much like, the end goal of whatever problem you're solving. It's just
Mhm.
trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, I
And
can
and
see it's the
speaking,
recipe for burnout if you only care about the end goal and are slogging through the rest of it. It's not sustainable.
right.
Mhm.
And speaking of your likes, I was wondering, can you share any projects or initiatives that you're currently in or have been in the past that you're excited about? um, excited to talk about? Which one excites you the most?
Mhm. Well, I think in general, at least work-wise, we do have our lead product, which is, again, really novel, really cool. It takes one long, large biopolymer and you add several dozen copies of a drug onto it. And so if this works, you can inject it into tissues and it will stay as a therapeutic just in that tissue. More, I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's long-acting and localized therapy. And I think that could have a lot of benefits for a myriad of diseases. Eyes ended up being our first choice for a range of reasons, but having this ability to take a drug and put it really only where you need it, rather than risking a lot of the systemic side effects you would get from drugs that you have to administer systemically, is really fascinating. But I do think of other projects that we're working on at Valitor, I think, all of our drugs are related to that, but we do, even as a small company, we're trying to work as much with outreach in the community, which is one of the reasons why I got connected with you all. But trying as hard as I can, even as I'm a mother of young kids, so I do have limited time, but to get more folks interested in science. We've had high schoolers come here and shadow everyone, and I'm trying to find other mentorship opportunities for high schoolers and for younger students. So that's at least work related and science related. That's the projects that I'm working on. But as you mentioned, I also have a huge garden, so I do like. I have a lot of other of those fun sustainability, climate change thoughts in my free time as well.
No, that's awesome.
Mhm.
I have two more questions before we
Yep.
conclude, and the first is, if you could work on a dream project unrelated to your current field or your current role, what would it be and why?
Yeah, so I mean, I just alluded to this, but I've always been, but of course, moving and living in Berkeley has really invigorated this. I'm quite interested in sustainability, and especially around single-use plastics and trying to minimize that. So one of my kind of complete side goals I have, and that I've kind of fluctuated into my life, is trying to remove as much single-use plastic in my day-to-day. So, whether or not it's buying in bulk or trying to find, using the shampoo bars or just a wide range of things, and really educating folks about that. But I do think if I had a project that I could work on, would be trying to make sustainability more equitable, and to make it more accessible, because a lot of these things are not, they're harder to find and they're more expensive. And just make it something that's actually makes sustainability more sustainable across the entire population is the best way to put it. And and on a related note, but also trying to remove food deserts. And I love urban gardening, and I have a big vegetable garden in my backyard with native plants and everything, and increasing that education and growing more gardens across the backyards, and of course teaching people how to cook those appropriately too. So a bit broad reaching, but those are my side passions that my 5-year-old has also started to enjoy too, so it's very fun.
Got it. Teaching them young. Um,
Yeah.
for sure. Climate and sustainability is my entire career, and
Yeah.
everything, all the initiatives that you're talking about is something that we're also constantly talking about. So I love that you're still interested in, science no matter what.
Mhm.
Um, and for our last question, if you could give a piece of advice to people who are currently exploring their educational and or their career paths, what would it be and why?
Okay. So one of them I get teased for a lot, but I'll still say it. Is especially if you're interested in a science career, but you're struggling with the math, that is okay. Um, I did have to take up to higher level calculus, but the math I use as a PhD biochemist is statistics and algebra that I learned probably as a freshman in high school. And so if you like the idea of science, but some of the other stuff is daunting, or even, what you think is memorization, a lot of that helps teach you and give you the foundation, but don't let that discourage you from actually doing it, because doing science is actually a lot different than what you learn in the courses. So If you're interested, stick to it. I do think for others in general is to try to find best ways to manage your stress. And I think this is one of these things that I've been on a journey, especially as a working mother and trying to balance everything. But I know when I was younger, I was so stressed out and everything seemed like the end of the world. I would call my mom after exams and think, oh my gosh, I failed them. And she's like, you're fine. And sure enough, yeah, I was fine. But finding those ways to kind of take everything down a notch and to just relax, and whether or not that's exercise, whether or not that's meditation, but finding something that's sustainable that really works for you. I think it makes your life a lot better, and it also makes the life for the people around you a lot better. And I think starting that early, especially, in early career, is really, really helpful. So that's, I think, one of the pieces of advice that I would like to give. I've
Yeah.
learned the hard way.
Yeah, I've also learned the hard way that managing your mental health is pretty key.
Yep.
And college is unnecessarily stressful for, I don't know if it's the wrong reason or the right reason, but it is stressful.
It is. And it's just, everything in general works out, but it often seems like the end of the world at the time. And I think that's, some of that's just life, but it's, finding ways to just let yourself feel those feelings and then let it go is
Exactly.
beneficial.
Yeah, sort of unlearning the sort of end of the world mindset
Yep.
is a work in progress, I think, that everybody should go through.
Yep.
Um, and with that, this concludes our Q&A. Thank you to Livy for joining us here. You can learn more about RePicture at repicture.com and all of our socials, including LinkedIn, Instagram, X, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you to our audience for joining us on this journey. And with that, this concludes our Q&A. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.